Greetings, greetings, greetings. Peace and blessings to everybody who has decided to join us here on your Wednesday evening. This is Healing City Baltimore's launch of Truth and Healing, a conversation series. Healing City Baltimore is a movement. And if you haven't heard about us, you're about to hear about us over the next 9 weeks. We are really excited about our very first guest this evening. We are going to be talking about different topics over the course of the next 9 weeks, topics that are provocative, that are confrontational, and that may even be uncomfortable. But at Healing City Baltimore, we believe in healing. We are committed to healing together as neighbors and as a community. So you won't be left feeling uncomfortable. We're going to leave each session with an idea of what healing will look like. So again, we just thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Dr. Melissa Buckley.
And I'm Councilman Zeke Cohen, and it is an honor and a privilege to be with you all here, as well as Dr. Buckley, my friend, this evening. Healing City, as Melissa mentioned, is a movement of people who are committed to healing from the bottom up. In 2018, we were visited in the city council by some young people who had just been through a school shooting and who called on us, their elected leaders, to not just talk and legislate around policing, but to create legislation to address the pressing trauma that they all faced. Their testimony led to a movement, what we call our Healing City movement, where over 80 organizations, people from all walks of life, barbers, beauticians, nonprofits, faith healers, doctors, all of us joined together to reimagine Baltimore as a place where people don't just survive, but can thrive, and where healing can truly take place. In 2019, we were proud to pass the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act, which places Baltimore on the forefront of a national movement to bring trauma-informed care into our government and to rethink so many of the policies and procedures that got us to where we are today. On today's conversation, we're going to be discussing the toxic legacy of racism in our city. We know that we didn't just wake up and have a digital divide or housing inequity or disproportionate trauma in communities of color, or a education system that has not met the needs of all of our Black and brown children. We didn't just get here. We got here through policies like redlining, policies like blockbusting, subprime lending, the war on drugs, mass incarceration, every facet of life in Baltimore that we now experience with our violence, with trauma, with endemic and systemic racism. We got here because people in positions of authority created policies that were white supremacist in origin and that did not do right by us as a city. And so what we hope to do through this series and through this movement is to reimagine Baltimore as a truly healing city. And so it's my distinct honor to introduce our two guests this evening. Andrea Brown is the executive director of the Black Mental Health Alliance. She is relatively new to that role, but she has come in with a bang. She is not here to play. And it is really exciting to welcome you to Truth and Healing.
Thank you so much, Councilman Cohen. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. And just call me Zeke.
Okay,
and then,
Zeke it is.
Everybody else does. And then our second guest, though she needs no introduction, Shauna Murray Brown is the executive director of Kindred Wellness. She is marvelous and magnificent. She is a healer within our community and someone who I truly love and respect for the work that she does, and for the example that she sets for those of us that are trying to figure this thing out. So Shauna, it's an honor to have you here too.
Yes, I'm so excited. Thanks for having me, y'all. This is going to be dope.
Facts, big facts.
Awesome.
Okay. So, are you ladies ready?
Ready.
Come on.
All
We're
right.
ready. Bring it.
All right. So, as we know, the theme for this evening is the legacy of racism here in Baltimore City. What we would like, I heard that. Was that you, Andrea?
It was.
Mhm. So, you know something about that then.
Mm.
Mhm. We would like for you, either of you can answer this question. Can you talk about the relationship between trauma and our legacy of racism and equality here in Baltimore? And I also would like it if you could help us to have a better understanding of the word trauma, because again, it's a word that folks kind of just throw around. So we want everybody to have a good working knowledge of what this word means.
Okay.
You got that, Shauna?
Yeah, I got it. I
Oh,
got
you
your
want
back.
to do? Okay. You want to do
Yeah.
that? Okay,
So,
good.
so beginning with what is trauma anyway, right? I think that it's really important for us to have this working definition, because I think we're going to talk about the wide range and the ways in which these things show up. So what trauma is a response to a physical or emotionally harmful or life-threatening event or circumstance that completely overwhelms an individual's capacity to cope. It likely changes their entire worldview. It alters the way that they move through the world, and it interrupts their interaction and engagement with the rest of their life. Now, oftentimes when we talk about trauma, we're thinking only of that individual experience, right? But I'm going to broaden it for us a bit, because it's really relevant as we're sort of navigating this conversation around the history of racism. And so that sort of would mean that we talk about the time frame and the collective experience. So there's, for the other forms of trauma, a single episode. So that could be like one time or a discrete or separate event that's spread over a course of time. Or you could have something that's repetitive or complex. That is, it's chronic, it's severe, and it's oftentimes occurring for a collective of people, a community of people, or a group of folks. And then the last aspect that I think is really important for us to contend with, as we are sitting with this long but important working definition and framework around trauma, is that it can be both intergenerational and historical, right? So it can have occurred in different time frames, often while resisting, and it occurs to serve a dominant society. So this includes invasions, slavery, acts of forced assimilation and colonization. And so you can see why I thought it important to add that context for how we will be reflecting. And so in alignment with that, the relationship between the experience of racism here in the city of Baltimore, both present day and historically, is directly speaking about both a collective experience of trauma, and since we're going to zoom in on the experience of the predominant population of folks here in the city of Baltimore, folks of African descent, but also this collective experience, this experience of a body of people. And because we understand that even if we're focusing on the experience of anti-Black racism that specifically focuses on the experiences of folks of African descent, that everyone is negatively impacted by this.
Thank you for pointing that out. First of all, that was such a holistic response.
Yeah,
you've given, I need to take my notepad out. But that last part, I think that's a really great, and Andrea, if you have something to add, we definitely want to hear it. But I appreciate the last part of what you said, Shauna, because it raises the lens of awareness around the fact that it is not just one particular demographic of people.
Yeah,
that's right. No, I actually, the definition was great. And it's funny, you were talking about your notepad and I was over here scribbling a bit, but you know, we start to talk about, you know, how did we get here and what does that all mean? And, you know, I've been reflecting the past few weeks. And, you know, when people talk about, you've heard the question, you know, we're sort of northern. We're not, it's not been racist here, but let's just, if we've got a minute, I want to just set this up just a minute. If we think about Francis Scott Key, I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just saying what I'm saying. And, you know, a lawyer from Frederick who was a slave owner, whose family owned a plantation and made lots of money doing it. But if we want to talk about what that looks like, and then he served as the district attorney in DC, but and fought against, obviously, and fought for slavery. But I raised that because here you got two stories. You got what we see there, man out of Frederick, and then he writes this song that becomes an anthem for people. You know, oh, say, can you see? And yet you expect people of color, not you, but we have this expectation of people of color to be okay, that they're not impacted by that. And so when we start to talk about the mindset, let's go back there. I mean, we can go back further. We can talk about steering and some other things, but I think it is important for us to just sort of take a stroll down that lane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's so right. You know, we've been in the city council having this conversation for a couple of years now around monuments, and Baltimore has had several Confederate monuments. You know, we, to your point, Andrea, we are a strange sort of northern southern city. We were in many ways the birthplace of the Civil War, when Union troops marched down Pratt Street and were attacked by a mob of upset white folks who did not want them here. And then Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, and the rest is history. But I think it is a strange tension. I always felt, as a history teacher, that's sort of built into the DNA of this city. You have so much resistance. You have folks like Frederick Douglass, who spent a considerable portion of his life in Baltimore and writes about it extensively in his own autobiography. But you also have so much in terms of both what you point out, with Francis Scott Key, the monuments to Confederate generals, and then just the laws and policies and practices that still have such a impact. I think now we've been talking a lot lately about the digital divide and what it means in this moment to have access to the internet, right? While we're on this Zoom, while we're in this pandemic, while children have been physically out of school for months, and those that don't have either a device or internet access really can't learn. And if you look, I was looking the other day at the demographic topography of who does and who does not have Wi-Fi, home Wi-Fi, and it's about 40% of our city in 2018 that did not have access to home wireless internet. If you look at the map of who does and who doesn't, it tracks almost perfectly with the red line maps of the 1940s, where you see access along what Lawrence Brown calls the white L, and then exclusion in the black butterfly. And so, these monuments, these moments, these songs from our past, these policies from our past, I think very much still haunt us today.
Absolutely.
That's the trauma.
I think it's really important too, as we're having this conversation and thinking about certain time frames, to remember how people of African descent got here, whose land we are still on, and how it was acquired. That colonization is a thing, it's the thing, and it's still relevant and present today. And so I think when we are contending with the sort of question, or, sort of dancing with or struggling with, how it haunts us, is that, we have to be clear that this country is rooted and based in racism and white supremacy, and the systems that we currently navigate through and struggle with have been and continue to uphold those values. And I think we would be remiss if we did not just sort of amplify and be really honest about that. And that in the event, if we are seeking to truly to seek what it looks like to be a healing city, that we will have to do a little bit of both and, right? That is, contend and commune with this concept of social justice, right? That is, doing harm reduction, trying to change policies and enact new practices. But it's also that I also think it's necessary for us to take a liberatory lens, and that is doing some imagining and recreating something new, because you can never get too far away from the root of the tree.
Love it.
Very good. Thank you. Zeke, you got the next question?
Yeah, so this one's for you, Shauna. When we started the work on the Healing City Act, you were one of the first folks that I sought out because of some of your healing work in community. One of the things I heard you say recently, I think it was on a podcast, was our culture has transformed in relationship to the trauma of racism. Could you unpack that a little bit as we're having this conversation, and frankly, as we're seeing our streets, folks out there protesting, marching, fighting, but as we're continuing to see daily, if not weekly, videos of Black and brown folks killed, often in police custody, sometimes not. As in Baltimore, most recently, incidents with clear implicit bias in a restaurant that then goes viral. I mean, it's sort of a omnipresent, everyday thing within our city and our country. And so I'm curious, when you talk about culture transforming in relationship to racism, what does that mean and what does that look like?
I think it's really, when I talk about this, I'm often talking about our collective response to trauma, right? So oftentimes, this is for everyone, right? So oftentimes I'm talking about the wide range, right? We got flight, freeze, appease, and fawn, right? So these different ways that we engage with trauma to be able to, in an effort to protect ourselves, right? So we can run away, we might freeze, we might be like, okay, and my body is doing this brilliant thing of trying to protect me, right? Or perhaps I am gonna rest because my body is so stressed out from the experience. Or perhaps I'm going to try to appease that entity, being, system, person who is harming me in an effort to sort of shift the relationship. So when I'm talking about this culture change, I'm talking first about how all of us are having this collective response to trauma, and we need to be very aware about what's happening in our bodies and the function of it so that we can interrupt it and interrupt the systemic oppression. But the other thing that I think is really important to amplify is that positionality and who you are matters when we're talking about how we get to this healing city, right? And while we would love to be like, race doesn't matter, none of this is important, we would love to have this position, it is important to recognize that our relationship to this experience as racialized beings, right? You being a racialized person as a white man, and us being racialized beings as Black women, right? That these experiences mean that we have to do some reflection on internalized inferiority for us that are folks of color, and an internalized superiority for those of us that are non-Black, white folks, right? And so what I'm noticing, if you study social movements, is that our capacity to and our tenacity around how we fight for radical change is shifting, largely because of media and our experiences and the language around these things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like, and this is kind of like we're not going on to the next question. I want you to stay right there. I feel like you were talking about allies without naming allies. Okay. So what I would love it if you could do, since you opened the door, like, kick it in, talk to us about that.
So first, I just think it's really important to recognize that all of this is a journey, right? So when we're talking about the definition of an ally is often depending on your positionality, but we'll talk about as white folks, or non-Black folks, if we're talking about what's happening in the present time. It's a person that sort of decides that they're going to open their eyes, they're going to be aware, they're going to educate themselves, and they're going to align themselves with the experiences of marginalized populations. Now, I am not okay with just stopping at allyship, though. Listen, I am for changing the game and shattering systems of oppression, not harm reduction. So I am for accomplice. And people don't like that word because it's like, oh, well, that might mean I might be breaking some laws. Well, don't we know that some laws are unjust?
Absolutely.
And so that's taking an ally a little bit further. That's saying not only am I gonna do some self-work, do my own research and not ask, folks of color to do this emotional work or research for me, but I'm going to actually put myself in a position where instead of allowing you to be harmed by the system, I'm going to give up something so that you can actually dismantle systems. And that's what I'll say.
So if I could just add to that, it's interesting. Yeah. So I like the way you phrase that, because oftentimes if we're not careful, or if we don't set the stage right, it almost becomes like this savior coming in. And so, white, green, whatever, but almost like this savior complex. And that's not what I don't believe in this moment. When I think of being an ally, obviously being a call to action, but I don't see that as a savior. And I don't believe that people are looking for another, for folk to sit at our feet, listen, and then write a paper. We're past that. We don't need another paper. And so I think what that really is, when I think of ally, a white, in this moment, a white ally, we will say, that really is speaking truth in spaces where you're comfortable, in spaces, in these power broker spaces, if that's such a thing. I just made that word up. I sort of like it.
I'm gonna write it down.
But I think, because it is in those spaces when you have voice, places that we don't get into, that you get to make real change. So I appreciate what Shauna said. I think we've got to be careful, because there are folk calling now asking, what can I do? What should I do? And so, and it isn't, you're not coming in on some horse trying to save Black people. That's not what this is. And that is not, again, let us sit down and hear you so that you can write another paper. We're past the paper. But I do think there is a real call to action to go into the spaces that are familiar to you, that hold power, that hold, and help change the narrative.
Change the narrative, but tear some stuff down. I mean, honestly, if you're in a power position, I'm gonna need you to write some policy and have it be different.
Yeah, and let me pick up on connect those 2 points right there, which is, I remember having this conversation with a professor of mine in grad school, and just this question. I am Jewish, white, grew up in Western Massachusetts, moved to Baltimore when I was 18 to go to college, had taught public school, had worked with children in West and in South Baltimore, in Sandtown and Curtis Bay. And I remember having this conversation with my professor, Lester Spence. He's a political scientist at Johns Hopkins. And it was this conversation around allyship and what does it mean to do that effectively. And I remember him being like, Zeke, first off, I freaking hate that term, because I don't need an ally. I don't need you to be my friend. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. What I need you to do is go into city council and write some laws and change some stuff and redistribute resources in a way that is fair and just and equitable. It's not about, I think there's this kind of soft talk around how do we show up for each other and all the rest, but really it's about, what he said to me is like, I don't need any of that. I don't need an effective thing. I need you to go in and make structural change within systems, because really, if otherwise we're just having a conversation, and I don't have time for all that.
You shouldn't have to be my friend to do, like, this isn't friendship, right? I think we get stuck because I have, folks that are just like, hey, how you doing? I haven't talked to you in 6 years. Don't ask me how I'm doing. We're not friends, but you should be, if you are really committed to this work, if you're really committed to social change, if you're really committed, you're going to do this whether or not I'm in the room or not. You're going to do this whether or not you got a response from me or not, whether or not you know nary a Black, a brown, indigenous folk person of color or not.
You're right about that. And so the thing about that, what you just said, Shauna, is there will be those moments where folks are uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
I should not have to be there with you to take the burden of you feeling uncomfortable. That's not what being an ally is at all. And so I actually agree with you all. Like the term ally, it sounds cute, but that's not really the direction that I'm interested in moving in.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And sometimes, we hide behind that. I mean, folk hide behind it because it's safe. I'm an ally. I march. What really? Okay. And
right. Exactly.
And
I think it's really important that as we're talking about this too, is that there be a level of accountability. And so when we're talking, so that's also a thing. Like, I think allyship is the beginning part, right? Because you're doing your self work and you become more aware or whatever. But an accomplice, no, you're not being my friend. You're not sitting at my feet and writing no papers, but you are listening to, watching, honoring the work of Black and brown folks, leading the way on how we should be interrupting our own oppression. Yeah. I think it's really, really important that we are clear that the folks that are most impacted by the experiences be at the forefront in some shape or form. So if that means that you are the one in the room, you're going to use your power and your privilege to do some things. And then we're going to be real clear about whose narrative we're going to give credit. And we're going to say, okay, now what is it that you'd like me to do now? That's right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Very good. Very good.
That's
before we get into the next question, I just have to put this out there. Again, I live in the best district in Baltimore, District. And so, we just had some of our neighbors paint the beautiful mural over here by Patterson Park. And as we're having this part of the conversation, Shauna and Andrea, it's like we love the mural and shout out to our neighbors for the boldness to make this statement. But, if we stay in this feel-good moment, then we're not doing the work.
No.
Because the work of Black Lives Matter doesn't feel good.
No.
It confronts, it tears down, it challenges, and it gets into city council and changes policies.
Yeah, and I think, Melissa and I were talking about this before the thing, which is one, you do recognize that everybody's on a journey, and I do honor and appreciate my constituents for going out in the middle of the night and painting Black Lives Matter on a street on Linwood Ave in Patterson Park. I think that is in a district, in a part of the city that really, really struggles, and Dr. Buckley has seen this with its racism. I think that is a bold thing to do, and I appreciate the folks that did that. But I think the thing that we're wrestling with is, how does it go beyond feeling performative or sort of like, I was thinking about interesting, putting on Linwood and sort of Patterson Park as this very gentrifying neighborhood. And so we're going to write Black Lives Matter in a space, in a place between the park where many people, both poor, white, Black, and brown people, can no longer afford to live anymore. So that's interesting too. So I guess the question is how do we take these symbols, these, proclamations that people are making, putting the sign in the window, painting it on the street, what does it look like to transform this sort of collective moment that I think people are feeling called to into something that is deeper and more transformative?
So the first thing that comes to mind for me, and it's been a common conversation I've had in my role in holding healing space for folks, is, I think first we have to begin with a level of self-awareness, because this is a pattern, right? Like, don't we have an MLK Boulevard like in every daggone city, and it's the one that goes from the richest part of the city to the poorest part? Okay, so like we love symbols, names, statue, right? Like American cult, like the U.S. American culture is informed vastly by a Eurocentric worldview of value, where we are seeking symbolism, right? And the symbol is what matters. It's why we, go and get fancy degrees. It's why we like the fancier car. It's why we like the big house. It's about the symbol. I think that the first step is to just be aware that is what's happening, right? That is, and that's something that needs to be interrupted. And then I think the second is to identify the Black organizations in the city of Baltimore that been, like the ones that have been doing the work in grassroots community for a period of time. Like, not just they came out during the uprising, like like folks that are like, if you look back 10 so years, right? Then we've been. So we got the Black Mental Health Alliance, Ben. Leadership might have changed, but the values have been. Okay. All right. Been, right? We got LBS, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle.
Yes.
Ben. I was one of the founding members of Ben. Kendra Community Healing, Kendra Wellness. And sometimes it's not a large organization. Sometimes it's people that have moved in and out, but have maintained and fortified the work. I think you have to go. Thank you for the beautiful mural. It's fly. I mean, it really is fly. I was trying. Okay. Okay. Now let's get to the typing. Let's reach out to our councilman and ask where are the Black folk that's been leading the movement, so that I can offer my support, ask for guidance on how to support, give monetary support, share, identify where I need to be volunteering, educate myself. We need to do some work, but we need to do it in honoring and recognizing the folks that have been here doing the work collectively. I mean, listen, and Baltimore is filled with brilliance.
Yes,
I mean, we've been doing this work. We just need to get it together. Go to collectively, okay? No O and no E and no I online, and look at all of the beautifulness of Black-led movement that Ben.
You're right.
Okay, that's it. That's what I said.
Thank you for that. And actually, you know what we can do, Shauna? We can actually post that on Healing Cities page as a follow-up to this. So thank you for pointing that out.
Certainly.
Andrea, did you want to add anything to that really quickly?
Ben.
Ben. Hashtag Ben. All righty. We don't have a whole lot of time at this point. So Zeke, do you want to just move into the final question?
Sure. So the thing that we were hoping to do at the end of each show with Truth and Healing is to pose this question around what a healing city would look like to you. And I think that, to Shauna's earlier point, this is really about us imagining what a better Baltimore could be, and then doing the work collectively of making it happen. So I want to start with you, Andrea. What would a really, truly healing city, Baltimore, look like?
So I think here's where I think it could start. I think we start with the accountability before we can heal in a real way. And I think Shauna mentioned that earlier. And this isn't about pointing the finger. This is about folk being accountable, and then how do we heal? And I think the creation, quite frankly, of not just safe spaces or brave spaces for people to talk and share. I think those are important. And I think that's part of it. But I read this open letter to corporate America on the New York Times. And one of the things he talked about was, looking at our people, positioning them in places that they should be. I think Shauna spoke to that. And so making sure that efforts that we lead look like people like me, Black and brown people. And I'm, not as a token, but as an effort. It is ours. It is this journey. So I think we start in those places. Again, creating a safe space. I don't know what that totally looks like, but I will. And then being accountable, having a level of accountability. And it's okay to say, you know what, we've done that. I don't know that we have. Yeah. And I think we've got to have those. And here's the other thing. I think we got to really speak truth and call folk out. And it's okay. People, this is not going to be, if you're looking for sweet and fluffy, this isn't going to be fluffy. It's going to be hard. But I think that's how we put the work in. So I think we start there.
Perfect. Shauna?
So since we started with where we can start, I'm going to start with where we might end up in the middle. Okay. In the middle of the process. In the middle of the journey, maybe in the middle of the first part, when I do some deep imagining, I think of a radical reallocation of resources. Mm-hmm. I think when we look at our city and we look at the business owners, the large institutions, the folks that are holding undue levels of power, and we do some radical reorganization where we reassert and reposition those that should really be in control of the collective experience of a primarily a Black city to folks that look like them. I think that when we're talking about true, like for folks love to dance with this diversity, equity, and inclusion language. And it's all good. We need a word to talk about everything. It's cool. But diversity and inclusion we ain't going to get all of the places we need to get for that.
That's right.
Radical reallocation of resources. That's coins. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's leadership. That's right. Power. That's right. That is saying, I recognize that I got here through some undue situations, and I'm willing to shift to the side because there are other folks that are better at acknowledging this for the collective experience of folks in the city of Baltimore. That's going to get you some healing, because when we talk about generational historical trauma and racism, it's not just the meditation that's going to heal us. Right? We're going to ensure that our future generations are not still at the bottom of the barrel. We need some reallocation of resources and coins.
Come on now.
Coins.
Come on.
Next time I want to act up just as bad as she does.
I do this everywhere. You ain't know.
This is regular.
Somebody should have warned you. This is
regular.
No.
We introduce you to Shauna Murray Brown.
It's my first time out the gate. I promise you. It's good though. I love it. Thanks, Z.
Telling the whole truth. My whole self. No code switching here.
At all. That's for another episode.
Not nary a time.
Not on truth and healing.
Not anyone, but when? Never. Not doing
never, ever. Listen, ladies, we appreciate you for occupying this space with us. We thank you for not code switching. Thank you for your very frank and confrontational approach to this necessary topic. This is the launch episode, and so you guys are going down in history with us. So we just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We also have to lift up the family tree and T. Rowe Price, because they have supported us in developing this series. So shout out to the folks over there.
And specifically shout out to Eric, who's our great producer behind the scenes, kept it moving. Thank you to Stacy, who co-developed this, and from my squad. Thank you to all the folks that have made this vision that Dr. Buckley, Melissa, and I shared into a reality. And we are really, really excited. Again, couldn't have had better first guests than you all to speak some truth. So I just want to say I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone that tuned in as well. We hope to continue these conversations to touch on politics and art and structures and systems and organizing and race and gender and class. We believe that we need to get into all of it in order to build ourselves a healing city. So again, thank you to all the folks that tuned in, and we are just getting started.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Much.